This was never about a random encounter. Let's be honest with each other. You didn't just stumble into that situation, or happen to cross paths with that person by sheer coincidence. The universe doesn't operate on such sloppy, haphazard terms, especially when a soul is on the line. Forget luck. Forget accident. There was a deliberate, powerful force at work, an internal compass that pulled you, not with shouted instructions or logical steps, but with a deep, undeniable tug in your spirit. That unseen force led you with surgical precision to a soul who was quietly, desperately breaking, a light flickering on the edge of utter darkness. This person wasn't staging a dramatic collapse. They weren't screaming out for attention in a way the world could easily recognize or dismiss. No, they were suffering in silence, a hidden agony known only to them and to the higher powers. And while every other person in their orbit, every friend, colleague, and stranger simply walked on by, you, for reasons your conscious mind couldn't even articulate, stopped dead in your tracks. You paused, you looked closer. It didn't make a lick of sense to your logic, but your spirit, your innermost knowing, recognized a crucial signal no one else could perceive. What you sensed wasn't written on a billboard or delivered by an audible voice in the wind. There were no flashing neon signs saying, "Help needed here." But you knew. That profound, deep-seated knowing bypassed your brain's filters and went straight to your gut. You didn't plan this detour. You certainly didn't apply for this particular mission. But your soul had already signed the celestial contract. Before you could even form a thought about it, the spiritual yes had been spoken because, chosen one, you were sent. You were deployed into a moment that was perfectly timed by divine design. Your mission wasn't to deliver a lengthy sermon or try to fix their complex problems with quick advice. That wasn't the goal. Your assignment was far more sacred and profound, to simply witness and to carry a light that no one else had the specific spiritual bandwidth to deliver. You were tasked with pouring divine energy, truth, and genuine light into a human vessel that had completely forgotten its own wholly original nature. This was about saving a beautiful, albeit deeply wounded, soul, a fallen angel in the most humble, silent way possible. It required you to act without any expectation of recognition, without seeking any worldly glory or applause. Your reward was the purpose itself. This isn't just a coincidence you're watching, and it's certainly more than a casual video. This is an absolute confirmation of a deeper reality. If a quiet, powerful fire just woke up in your chest, that inexplicable stirring, then you already know the truth of this message. You recognize the ring of this eternal truth. You are not meant to stay silent about it. Do this now. Don't just consume this message, acknowledge it. By commenting 99 below, you're not signaling to me, but offering a spiritual signal to heaven that you've received this transmission loud and clear. Tap the like button to seal your agreement with this divine truth. And if you know, deep down, that your journey is not just some series of random events but an ongoing, intentional mission, then you need to subscribe. Because the next steps of your life were written in the sacred texts of time, long before you took your first breath here. It is finally time for you to truly remember the essential, life-altering reason why you were sent in the first place. This individual was never just a casual friend, a temporary stranger, a brief partner, or a simple passing connection in your life's narrative. No, they were a divine link, placed on your path with unbelievable, meticulous precision by invisible, guiding hands. Hands that you may not consciously see, but that your soul has always been able to feel and rely on. Think of it this way. You didn't just meet them. Your soul was explicitly sent to them, and the assignment you carried wasn't printed out on a sheet of paper. There were no detailed instructions stapled to your heart. You didn't have a glowing angel materialize in your doorway to announce, "This soul is sacred." You are to protect them at all costs. Yet, despite the lack of external signs deep in the absolute certainty of your gut, you knew. You recognized a unique, wounded holiness within them. You could sense a voice that once sang in perfect harmony with the heavens, now tragically reduced to fearful whispers and deep, isolating silence. Yet miraculously you heard them anyway. Even when their lips remained completely sealed, you could feel the weight of their inner battles. You sensed the presence of their internal shadows, And even as they managed a polite, practiced smile for the world, you saw the emotional cracks in the foundation, while almost everyone else was completely fooled by the perfect mask they wore. You, the chosen one, were able to read the truth of their very soul. This wasn't merely surface-level empathy. This wasn't just common kindness. This was spiritual alignment. You weren't simply being nice. You were, at that moment, on an active, life-altering assignment. And here's a profound secret that very few will ever grasp. Your spirit signed the full contract for this interaction long before your physical birth. This connection, this specific mission, this exact soul was written into the very fabric of your destiny, before you even drew your first conscious breath. That is the one and only reason why you found it impossible to look away from their pain. That's why the idea of walking away, of leaving them to their fate, felt fundamentally wrong to your entire being, even when your logical mind was begging for simplicity and peace. This was never about logic. This was about divine orchestration. It was a quiet but powerful call from the highest place, completely hidden inside the profound depths of your compassion. They weren't openly crying out for a savior. They never begged for your help. Yet their deep, aching silence reached the immediate ears of the Almighty. And you were sent as the direct, immediate response, not with loud, aggressive words, not with powerful, flowery sermons, but with your simple, undeniable presence. Understand this truth. Sometimes God doesn't send a seasoned preacher to a soul in crisis. Sometimes he sends a presence, a pure, anchoring heart, a gentle, unwavering light. He sends you. You weren't there to fix the complexity of their brokenness. You were there to anchor them. You didn't have to change them or try to remake them. You were there to remind them of the magnificent person they already were, the person they still are beneath the rubble. You held a sacred, protected space for a light that everyone else had lazily labeled a problem. You stood guard over a flame that was dangerously close to being extinguished forever. And this is where the mystery becomes even more profound. Why you? Why did you feel that sudden, piercing urgency for someone you barely even knew? Why did your soul instinctively leap forward even when your mind screamed, "Don't get involved. Let it go"? Why did they appear in your life at that precise, specific moment when your own world might have been shaking just as violently? The answer is simple and complex. It was never only about them. It was equally about you. The mission wasn't simply a one-sided act of saving. It was fundamentally an act of mutual awakening. Heaven knew this truth. If you could clearly see the divine light in a struggling soul, you would inevitably be forced to remember the divine, unextinguishable light inside of yourself. It was an interconnected mutual ignition. One soul was silently flickering, nearly lost in the dark, and your soul was intentionally carrying the fire necessary for the restart. When your two spirits finally met, the forgotten flame returned to life. But the truth goes even deeper than this initial encounter. What if the person you silently rescued, that beautiful lost soul, was not the single solitary individual assigned to you? What if this encounter was only the first gentle ripple in an incredibly vast and much greater master plan? What if you have been carrying out these divine assignments, these quiet acts of sacred service, all along your path without ever truly knowing the magnitude of what you were doing? And what if, even right now, as you read these words, there is another soul already about to cross your path, waiting for the unique light and specific energy only you possess? You need to stay with me for the next step, because what you're about to realize will permanently shake everything you thought you knew about your own past, the deep meaning of your most significant connections, and the eternal, vital reason for your purpose here on Earth. The signs have always been there, clear as day. You just didn't have the spiritual vocabulary or the right framework to understand exactly what you were witnessing until this very moment. They never screamed. They never begged. They didn't collapse dramatically in public for the world's pity. They simply tragically faded. They faded into the forgotten background. They disappeared behind perfectly choreographed, polite smiles. They faded into a life that looked convincingly fine on the surface, but was, in reality, utterly suffocating them from the inside out. This was not a loud, visible fall. This was a slow, agonizing, silent descent. And precisely because it lacked the drama that gets attention, no one else noticed it. But you did, because what everyone else mistook for internal strength, your spirit immediately recognized as mere survival. And survival, you instinctively knew. This was a soul once radiant and full of celestial potential, now dangerously dimmed by the sheer overwhelming weight of a world that simply could not and did not understand their unique divine blueprint. You could feel that ache, that subtle, sorrowful flicker behind their eyes before they ever uttered a single self-pitying word. That feeling communicated, I once believed in something incredible, something more than this, but now I'm just struggling to survive the day. This wasn't just common depression or a fleeting sadness. This was a divine being completely disconnected from the source of their own light. A celestial, important assignment that had been crushed by rejection, tragically muted by betrayal, and carelessly buried under a mountain of false expectations that were never, ever meant for them to carry. They were not built for this broken world. That's exactly why it broke them so completely. They spoke softly, moved with an almost ethereal gentleness, and dreamed wildly in the sanctity of their own silence. Yet everything around them, the noise, the culture, the people, constantly told them to stop, to dim their light, to desperately blend in, to hide what was sacred and holy about them. And so they stopped shining, not because they weren't inherently worthy, but because no one had ever simply told them, your wings are still allowed to open. Until you showed up. You saw it, didn't you? That unmistakable divine residue in their energy field. That profound ancient ache that had absolutely nothing to do with this current lifetime. That purity of spirit that seemed impossibly old and otherworldly. This wasn't just a regular person. This was an angel who had utterly forgotten the truth of who they were. And heaven sent you, not to fix their flaws, but to find them. Angels don't always fall with a crash of fire and thunder. Sometimes they fall in profound, invisible silence, in a slow, private agony that no one ever suspects. And when they fall, in that way, God doesn't need to dispatch an entire army. He simply sends a witness, a perfect companion, a pure, connected soul like yours. You were the one who had the spiritual vision to notice what every other person casually ignored. You felt the deep dissonance. You picked up on the divine signals, hidden within their polite laughter, in their nervous hesitation, in their deep, desperate hunger for something spiritual they couldn't even name. They lacked the ability to clearly ask you for help, but you didn't need them to, because this connection wasn't about the limits of human words. This was purely about recognition, spirit to spirit, light to light. And now, for the core revelation, what if this divine soul, this angel, didn't fall by accident? What if their very descent was, ironically, a necessary part of a much higher, complex design? What if they had to fall to that specific depth so that you could be perfectly positioned to remember that you were sent? Because in the powerful act of saving them, you were forced to look inward and truly see yourself. You remembered the times in your own life when you faded quietly, when your own magnificent wings felt clipped and weighed down by the sheer heaviness of the world. And suddenly, this wasn't just a story about them anymore. It became a story about both of you. Two beautiful divine lights meeting, not in a moment of perfect, flawless harmony, but in a necessary, life-altering divine collision. And right now, there is a deep truth that heaven desperately wants to show you. Something vital about why this particular soul was placed directly in your life at that exact, irreplaceable moment. Something you could have never predicted on your own, but that will now make every single thing finally make profound sense. Stay with me, because this next layer of truth is going to dramatically change the way you look at every single soul you have ever carried, cared for, or ministered to in your lifetime. The whole truth is unfolding right now, and you, the chosen one, are perfectly situated in the absolute center of it. You were the answer. Heaven didn't send a simple sermon. God didn't send a blinding bolt of lightning. He sent you, not to fix their theology or to lecture them with eloquent, flowery words, but to be the undeniable, tangible reminder that someone still truly sees the immense forgotten beauty they desperately buried inside. You were sent to prove that someone still absolutely recognizes the powerful, divine spark hidden deep within them. To prove that someone still deeply, profoundly cares. Because when people lose their faith, they don't need to be preached at. They need to be seen. And that is the most powerful sacred thing you did. You never tried to force them to change. You simply reminded them of the magnificent, true self they already were. You saw the light beneath their ashes. You spoke directly to the royalty hidden under the spiritual rubble. And that truth shook them to their core. How could a perfect stranger look at their visible brokenness and still, without flinching, call it sacred? How could someone walk so confidently into their suffocating darkness and act as if it were still holy ground? But that is precisely what happened. Without even realizing the profound cosmic impact of your actions, you became a radiant lighthouse. You weren't shouting commands through a megaphone. You were simply standing there, glowing, anchored, and present. From the outside, it looked like the simplest thing in the world. A casual interaction, a brief conversation, a small gesture, a passing moment. But on the inside, the entire reality of their world began to radically shift. Their heart whispered a tiny, vital thought. Maybe I'm not invisible after all. Maybe God still has his eyes on me. Maybe this isn't my final tragic ending. And in that tiny, flickering moment, their lost faith reignited. It wasn't a roaring fire yet, but it was enough. It was enough to force them to take one more hopeful step. Enough to lift their heavy head. Enough to simply breathe again. Not just to survive another day, but to remember who they were meant to be. And now, we reach the haunting, vital question that demands your attention in the silence. What if that one single moment you shared ultimately saved their entire destiny? What if their story, which would have ended tragically right then and there, is now only just beginning, because you obediently followed a spiritual pull you didn't even completely understand? What if the primary reason God sent you wasn't just to reignite someone else's fragile faith, but to awaken and confirm your own powerful, unique calling? Because something immense is undeniably coming next in your life. A moment is being prepared that will not only validate everything you've ever felt, every intuitive moment, but will ruthlessly expose exactly how many lives, how many futures, are deeply attached to your simple, quiet obedience. You were sent to one soul. But what if that single soul was only the opening act? Stay with me, because what you're about to deeply realize next will completely reframe every connection you have ever questioned and will finally open your eyes to the authentic, strategic reason heaven consistently keeps placing certain specific souls directly in your path. This was never just a small thing. This was never a casual video. This was a profound summons. If something inside your spirit just burned, broke, or awakened with a new intensity, it's because your soul vividly remembers the contract. You have always known, deep down, beyond the reach of logic, beyond the limits of language, that you were never, ever meant to be ordinary. You didn't just passively pass by human pain. You felt it deeply. You heard it screaming in the deepest silence. You saw the truth hiding behind the eyes that expertly pretended everything was completely fine. Because you were sent, planted, and strategically positioned, hidden in plain sight until the exact right soul desperately needed your very specific light. And now the spiritual veil has been lifted. Now the powerful truth is loud and clear. You were never the one who was fundamentally in need. You were the one divinely assigned to lift what others had tragically buried, to love what the world had carelessly abandoned, to bravely stand in the sacred space between total collapse and true redemption and fiercely declare, "Not on my watch." That was never a coincidence. It was powerful strategy. It was ultimate trust. It was God choosing you. So the most important question is no longer, why do I feel so much? Why do I attract the broken? Why do I carry so much for people I barely know? No. Now the question must become, how will I walk now that I finally know who I am? Because you have now been activated, fully awakened, and confirmed in your purpose. You didn't imagine any of this. You weren't being too sensitive. Heaven has been consistently speaking to you, and this powerful message is the final, undeniable echo of your calling. So hear me clearly, chosen one. You carry fire, you carry powerful alignment. You carry the very answers for souls who don't even possess the words for what they are desperately searching for. You are not weak. You are expertly wired for spiritual warfare. Not the loud, distracting kind fought with unnecessary noise,